The lore of Arknights explained, a brief overview of everything existing and happening, and yes, this is the short version. From the get-go, Arknights is not post-apocalyptic, it is apocalyptic. The difference between that being that while post-apocalyptic would be showing a world after shit has hit the fan, Arknights shows a world in which shit has been hitting the fan actively for thousands of years, and people, cultures and factions which have not only learned to live alongside all the shit, but have learned how to utilize it, and that is epic. Before we talk about the various forms of shit, we first need to talk about magical rocks. The by far most important thing in the world of Arknights is this mineral you see on screen, Originium. Almost everything we will discuss down the line is related to this thing. Originium on the surface just appears to be semi-transparent black crystals that give off a bad vibe. But what's big about them is that they contain insane amounts of energy. The inhabitants of the world of Arknights have created a technology known as the Originium engine, which is capable of utilizing the energy within Originium. Ever since then, Originium has been industrialized and nowadays gets used as an energy source for pretty much everything you see. Like, actually everything. Home appliances like fridges, water kettles or radios, even cars run on Originium. When you check on a device running on energy, you won't find any wires connected to a power plug. They all just include a small device filled with small black crystals, a so-called crystal electronics unit. And cars don't have a fuel intake or a tank, just an engine running on rocks. Originium and the energy coming from it are nothing magical. Originium engineering is a science, and you can get an Originium engineering degree at the university. People tending to high-tech Originium equipment are referred to as engineering casters. Speaking of casters, the energy stored in Originium does not only get used to power your toaster. Let's talk about Originium arts. Originium is the basis for all forms of Originium arts. To some of you, Originium arts seem like Arknights' version of magic, but in reality it's more similar to learning how to manipulate the energy within Originium in order to do stuff. We will talk about that stuff in a moment. While it is possible to cast arts by just holding a random Originium ingot, you will see that the vast majority of arts users walk around with an arts unit or a casting unit, often coming in the form of what we would call a staff. Basic casting units get mass-produced in factories, there's nothing magical there. It is also said that it is possible for everybody to learn the most basic arts, as long as they are willing to put in enough work. And if you are not capable or willing to learn, you can just get yourself a piece of technology called the Universal Originium Circuits. Essentially a little thing that can be loaded with a couple of very basic Originium arts. It allows people to use arts even if they are completely incompatible with them. Let me give you an example for a couple of arts to give you a feel of how that stuff works. Those are only a couple of examples. Arts are rather hard to categorize, I gotta say, so I will only put a couple of small examples out. Yeah. Fireballs. It is possible to throw fireballs. Random bandits in the wilderness can be found creating fireballs with the strength of a grenade or an RPG from our world. Healing arts. It is possible to heal somebody by using arts, however, they are only capable of stopping bleedings or making wounds heal slightly faster, and an extensive study of medical science and anatomy is needed in order to properly utilize them. Healing arts are no substitute for real medical skill at the operating table. Controlling things and people. It is possible to control low intelligence creatures with Originium arts. This has been a part of pioneering tactics since ancient times. It is also possible to operate unmanned aerial vehicles, aka drones, that way as well. You equip them with a long-range arts receiver and BAM! Operate them. Gun-type arts. That's not a joke. The majority of ranged weapons in Arknights are bows and crossbows and such, as guns in Arknights are special. Every single gun user counts as a caster. Guns which don't require Originium arts don't exist. Both the gun and every single bullet it uses, the so-called edged bullets or edged ammunition, are powered by Originium and therefore count as full-fledged casting units on one level with the staffs we see. In order to use a gun, the caster has to use their arts to stabilize the gun first. They should feel a connection between their arm and the weapon's interior. Through that connection, they should reach out into the ammunition inside of the gun's chamber and then activate it. If you lose control of your arts during that process, the gun is going to misfire and potentially get damaged. Since guns are harder to handle than a crossbow and their ammunition is very expensive and their maintenance also is really complicated, they don't find nearly as much usage as crossbows. Fun fact: there exist arts units which are imitations of guns, but they skip out on the part of having to reach out to every single bullet, as they don't fire actual ammunition, but arts beams instead. Extra fun fact: there are automatic assault crossbows in Arknights. One thing needs to be said when it comes to the weaponization of Originium. On one hand, you can use arts to directly hurt other people, on the other hand, you can also just make it go kaboom. Explosives are usually based on Originium. No Originium arts are needed, however, to operate those Originium explosives. Quite frankly, Originium arts that can make Originium explode are rather rare. Originium grenades getting thrown is a thing, so are hand-carried Originium launchers and full-on mortars. All in all though, pretty cool stuff, right? A world in which power does not come from sticky goo made out of dead dinosaurs, but directly from rocks, and it gives people magic? That sounds amazing! Originium comes with some insane dangers. Areas in which you find Originium mines, factories or heavy usage of Originium products, generally speaking, suffer heavily from Originium pollution. And that is bad, as it means that everybody with long-term exposure to Originium and its products is more likely to contract a mysterious disease called Oripathy. If you get Originium dust into an open wound, you 100% always will contract Oripathy. The time directly after getting infected with Oripathy is very critical, as it is possible that it turns into an acute Oripathy. Acute Oripathy is what you call it when the source of an Oripathy infection rapidly starts circulating through the infected's blood. Symptoms of it include thrombosis and with that difficulty in breathing up to suffocation. If the acute Oripathy is not suppressed via drugs, infection symptoms will intensify in a very short amount of time. A very dangerous thing about acute Oripathy is that the infected can have outbursts of Originium dusts when they cough, which has the potential to cause even more infections. If the infection does not turn into an acute Oripathy and spreads normally through your body, it can often happen that the infection will go unnoticed for some time. As Oripathy spreads through your body, it becomes completely filled with crystal depositions, genuine crystals everywhere. As you can imagine, those can easily damage or rupture your internal organs. At some point, crystallizations on your skin will also start to appear, which, as you can assume, cause almost unbearable pain to the infected and greatly impact their lives. Fun fact, those crystal decompositions pretty much always have a black hue. In rare cases they have different colors, although we don't know why. Currently we only really have exactly 2 examples for different colored depositions. Oripathy is incurable. No known cure for it exists and very little progress is being made in finding one. While incurable, it is possible to suppress your symptoms by using so-called Oripathy suppressants. However, those are far from available to the average infected. Usually, the only thing available to them are painkillers, which they take in order to deal with the fact that they are being ripped apart by crystals growing within their own bodies. There are also some really disgusting companies who take advantage of that situation and provide infected with painkillers which they claim to be Oripathy suppressants. We need to talk about the last stage of Oripathy, the eventual death. Sometime after an infected passes away, the crystals on their skin will start to glow. That indicates that they will soon start to disintegrate. Once the disintegration starts, the infected's body will slowly turn into glowing Originium dust, which floats around for a while before it settles down. It has to be made sure that that Originium dust is contained within closed space, so that it doesn't infect further people. An interesting fact about Oripathy: remember how in order to cast arts you need a bit of Originium as a catalyst? The infected can use the Originium inside of their own bodies for that. It's as if they would use their own body as a staff, you could say. Since they don't rely on a casting unit, it is pretty much impossible to stop them from casting. Furthermore, it is also possible for an infected to use their bodies to just strengthen their arts. This is very dangerous though, as it will cause further damage to their body, and strengthen your infection even further. All those things are only possible if your infection is strong enough as well. If you only have a mild infection, the Originium inside of you is just not strong enough to fuel your arts. Because of that, most infected casters still use casting units. The infected themselves are not the only ones using the Originium inside of them to cast arts though. There are also absolutely disgusting people out there who use the bodies of them as casting units. Yep. It is implied that there are people out there who go out of their way to hunt down infected so that they can use them for that sort of stuff. And that leads us to how the infected get treated. It's bad. Very bad. Everybody hates them. There are scientists out there which actively study the infected in order to prove that they deserve to die. That sort of bad. And even the poorest of the poor people will go out of their way to avoid contact with the infected. In most parts of the world, the infected actively get separated from healthy people, with the stated goal being to prevent the disease from spreading too far. The interesting thing about that is, having contact with an infected does not lead to Oripathy transmission. It is possible to get infected during the Originium dust outbursts during acute Oripathy and during the Originium dust created by the disintegration of deceased infected, the stuff we mentioned earlier, but not by just spending time with them. However, the majority of people in Arknights just believe the opposite. So, a deadly, incurable disease which causes its infected immense pain and suffering? Surely this has to be the worst thing in Arknights and the most dangerous thing you have to deal with. Originium pollution, which we mentioned earlier, has caused another massive problem, although one maybe not as big as Oripathy. Catastrophes. Catastrophes are a weather phenomenon in Arknights which comes in the form of what we would consider natural catastrophes, like heavy storms, blizzards or floods, sometimes even meteor showers. Yep. They are a pretty common thing as well, yet they happen in unpredictable intervals. It is said that the existence of Originium is directly responsible for the existence of catastrophes. From what I gathered, it all somehow revolves around the density of Originium particles on the surface. The most easy to spot sign for a catastrophe forming are the so-called catastrophe clouds. You see the clouds in the sky converging into one big and dark one, and the air pressure changes drastically. Catastrophe clouds usually end up being pitch black. While that happens, it seems as if the heaven is threatening you. Wild beasts are very sensitive to approaching catastrophes, so watching their behavior can also be used as an indicator for an upcoming catastrophe. Wild beasts also are generally speaking very good at avoiding Originium pollution. Catastrophes have insane destructive power and can easily wipe out an entire city. Areas hit by a catastrophe will be sprinkled with active Originium all over the place, which means that if you don't get killed by the catastrophe itself, you're gonna die because of the Oripathy you get from being in the affected zone. Nice. How can civilization exist when you're at the constant risk of clouds throwing rocks at you? Well, you make your cities mobile. In the most literal sense, the cities of Arknights genuinely drive around on massive tracks, relocating themselves in order to avoid catastrophes. Non-nomadic cities are insanely rare and essentially not even worth discussing here. Pretty much every single settlement you can find is mobile, no matter whether it is a massive city or just a mobile village. It usually takes a mobile city anything between 2 to 8 weeks to completely evacuate the area of a predicted catastrophe. We got a full-on description of how those evacuations happen as well. First of all, the city has to figure out an evacuation route, obviously. Once that happens, the city stops the flow of power to entertainment facilities and public facilities and fully focuses on the upcoming movement in order to be as fast as possible. The city then separates into individual city plates which all move around separately. That's one of the most important things to remember when talking about mobile cities. They consist of multiple big plates which can connect and disconnect and move both together and without each other. Makes sense, right? If they move and come across a mountain, they can't just jump, they need to separate. Fun fact, mobile cities have internet. Or well, a variant of it, I guess. Communication network technology is considered normal within mobile cities, while the open wilderness doesn't really have it for the most part, since Originium-rich zones heavily interfere with communication technology. The only way to possibly circumvent this would be to build up base stations all over the place, which sounds doable, but they would be at the constant risk of getting ripped apart by catastrophes. So how do cities communicate? Messengers and transporters. Actual people who just get into cars and risk their lives traveling around delivering both goods and messages. When speaking of that, we need to talk about another group of people, catastrophe messengers. Catastrophe messenger is a genuine job. If you become one, your task essentially is to roam the wilderness and watch out for changes in the weather in order to predict catastrophes. Catastrophe messengers have it really rough. On one hand, they are at the constant risk of getting wiped out by a catastrophe or avoiding it just to then contract Oripathy. On the other hand, they carry an insane mental burden as they are responsible for the lives of many people, essentially everybody else, and many catastrophe messengers end up being traumatized and just quit their jobs. It needs to be said that catastrophe messengers aren't an organization or a guild or something. They are a very loose collective of people who hand out reports and offer their services to cities and individuals. Okay, so the society of Arknights is dominated by lots of mobile cities, which get held together by messengers and catastrophe messengers. Sounds like a lot of independence and freedom. It is said that the creation of the first mobile city started the modern era of the world of Arknights. It had been dominated by tribal structures for thousands of years. That changed when people started to live in the cities. At the beginning we really mostly had independent city-states, however those would soon start to group up and a new concept was created. Nations. There's a variety of nations in Arknights' world, all with their different identities and customs and a very rich history. Going into massive details on everything would be boring as shit, so let me give you a brief rundown of all the places. But before that, a quick PSA. When looking for a map of the world of Arknights, you are very likely to come across something like this. I have seen quite a couple of people think that those colorful polygons are supposed to be islands and all the space in between is supposed to be water, but that's not the case. Maps that look like this are political maps, not geographical maps. While large bodies of water exist in Arknights and we are also capable of locating them, they are not visible on maps like this. The colorful polygons indicate which territories are actively being controlled by the individual nations, and the space in between is just territory that is not actively controlled and mostly looks like this. That being said, let's get into the countries now. Ursus. The empire of Ursus is massive. Ursus gets reigned by an emperor, but where other emperors have a crown or a scepter as an insignia, the emperors of Ursus have a chashek, which gets passed down through the generations. The current emperor is named Fyodor Ivanovich. The most important man besides him is the former finance minister Witte, who now serves as the prime minister. The two lead the country from the imperial capital of the deity Griffinburg, and they have a lot of work to do. The country is plagued by massive internal strife between the old nobility on one side and the emperor and his state council on the other side. Nowadays, Ursus is considered to be at the verge of collapse. Yen. Yen is a massive empire ruled by an emperor referred to as the True Lung. An important location worth mentioning is the city of Lungmen, which is one of Yen's most powerful economic centers. It is ruled by a man named Wei Yanwu and has a decent level of autonomy within its nation. It is known for being all about law and order and having a high network speed. Higashi. Higashi is a rather secluded nation which gets ruled by the 8 distinguished families. Not too long ago, the 8 families split into a northern ruling bloc and a southern ruling bloc, which put Higashi into a state of civil war. The southern bloc is called Mitsumoto, while the northern bloc is called Kogon. Kogon is considered to be way more old-fashioned when it comes to the south, and it is also way more heavily armed. Mitsumoto, on the other hand, is supposed to have way better living standards than the north and a stronger economy. For the last 20 years there has been a truce between the two sides. Recently though, things have been starting to get heated again. Kasdel. Kasdel is hell on earth. Not too long ago, Kasdel suffered a lot during a devastating civil war. It is very common for people born in Kasdel to not have names, straight up because of how short lives there usually are. It is said that the people of Kasdel have plenty of experience in dealing with Originium because of how much of it is just sprinkled with it. Furthermore, the majority of Kasdel is infected. The seemingly worst part of Kasdel has to be its industrial area, which gets described as a city of death, as it is surrounded by a massive slum which just keeps growing by a constant influx of refugees. It's said to be ridden with crime. In the parts depopulated by the civil war, there is a decent amount of new settlements being founded, mostly by people not from Kasdel. Kasdel is gonna become important again later on, so please don't forget that it exists. Rimbilliton. Rimbilliton is an interesting place. It's completely centered around Originium mining. It is filled with a variety of small to medium-sized mining companies. Because of the highly developed mining industry, the general population is way more likely to be exposed to Originium than it usually would be the case. Because of that, there is a very large amount of infected in Rimbilliton, and a very large part of the population is desensitized to Oripathy. In order to get people to work for them, Rimbilliton's companies offer a variety of benefits to everybody, including the infected. However, not all of them hold their promises, and things often aren't as good as they initially seem. Lytanian. Lytanian is a country in which arts are very important. The usage of classical Originium arts is very widespread amongst the inhabitants of Lytanian. The vast majority can practice at least some very basic arts. A Lytanian unable to use arts is considered defective. Staffs produced in Lytanian are very widespread and can be found everywhere. For a long time, Lytanian was ruled by a powerful caster called the Witch King, who ruled through terror and fear. His rule was ended by the twin empresses, one with golden hair and one with black hair, who killed him and then became the country's new rulers. By now, the country has pretty much fully recovered from the Witch King era. Syracusa. Syracusa is completely dominated by the so-called families. It is said that about 5 of 10 Syracusans are a part of a family, and that most young people in Syracusa want to join a family at some point in their lives. The families completely run the entire nation of Syracusa from the shadows. There is some conflicting information on the number of families, though the numbers seem to vary between 12 and 13. For some reason. The families are known to be led by a woman who is known under various names: the Godmother, Miss Sicily, the Sicilian Boss Lady. She is known to have her own underlings, and the rest of Syracuse's families are scared of her. Betrayal is considered to be the worst possible crime in Syracuse. Laterano. Laterano is a theocracy ruled by a pope. Laterano is surrounded by a wall and seems to be quite the safe and nice place. What Laterano is known for is a culture that heavily revolves around guns and explosives. Citizens of Laterano are allowed to use explosives on the streets and demolish buildings. Iberia. Iberia is the definition of fell off. It once was a powerful empire, one of the strongest ones in Arknights' world. That time was referred to as the Golden Age. That glorious period was ended by an event called the Silence, the Great Silence, or the Great Calamity. A massive flood wave destroyed large parts of the nation and completely reshaped its coastline. Iberia was then taken over by an organization referred to as the Inquisition, which controls it to this day. The Inquisition has placed various restrictions on the nation. Certain fields of scientific research are banned, access to the sea is not allowed, and while it is easy to leave Iberia, it is significantly more difficult to return to the nation. Iberia's coast is considered specifically dangerous as it is filled with members of a cult referred to as the Church of the Deep. One of the good things Iberia is known for are its swordsmanship techniques and its sword masters. Victoria. Victoria considers itself an empire. It has the political ambition to impose an international order dominated by itself. At the moment though, you don't really see a lot of that. Victoria has a lot of trouble with internal politics. Victoria for the longest part was ruled by the Dracos and the Aslans. A treaty between the two sides signed in ancient times qualified the members of both of those sides to become the rulers of Victoria. The Dracos' politics were dominated by an unquenchable thirst for conquest, while the Aslans wanted to gain power through order. Around 2 decades ago, the Draco bloodline supposedly was wiped out, seemingly leaving the Aslans with no other opponents. However, not long after that, the last Aslan king was executed. With both dynasties seemingly gone, Victoria has been without a king and without internal unity for many years now. With no king to wear it, the Victorian crown and other royal emblems have been stored deep within the royal palace in the capital city, Londinium. Kazimierz, the land of knights, or at least that's what it used to be. Kazimierz is a fully commercialized nation essentially controlled by an entity known as the Kazimierz General Chamber of Commerce. The once glorious knights are nowadays nothing more than entertainment for the masses, as they get put against each other in various knight competitions. Furthermore, they serve as walking billboards for Kazimierz's many corporations. Sami. Sami is one of the places we know the least about. Being located in the far north, its landscape is made up of fields of ice and dark forests. An interesting group of people in Sami are the snow priests, who are capable of stopping snowstorms by singing. They can also be seen directly talking to the snow. Skiing is said to be very popular in Sami. Kjerek, the nation of ice. A very isolated place. Many goods, including vegetables, are hard to come by in Kjerek, even if you have money. Modern day technology only gradually is spreading throughout Kjerek. Many hunters live in its big mountains, completely isolated. Columbia. Columbia is a former Victorian colony which gained its independence not that long ago. Life in Columbia is considered to be very technological. It is the only nation in Arknights which does not only have communication technologies within its mobile cities, but also within its entire wilderness. Columbia achieves this by using mobile base stations. A term associated with the country is the Columbian Dream. It is constantly expanding westwards by sending out wasteland pioneers, many of them infected, who establish frontier cities. Their life expectancy is rather short. The infected make up the majority of Columbia's low-cost workforce and play an important role in its fast-growing economy. Bolivar. Bolivar is a former Iberian colony which has been caught up in a three-way civil war for a long time now. The first faction is the Singas government, Nominally it is the official government of Bolivar, but it is mostly considered to be a puppet state under the control of Lytanian. Its leaders are the members of the Singas dynasty. The second faction is the autonomous government. It is the result of a parliamentary split which then took the chance to seize power. Considered to be very well funded, meaning that it has some big backers as well. Then there's the third faction, the True Bolivarians, a faction established by Bolivarians in order to oppose both of the other factions. Their forces are considered to be rather lackluster and undisciplined. The majority of the fighting between the factions seems to happen in the center of the nation, with the outskirts mostly getting spared. Siesta. Siesta is a city-state and one of the few city-states in Arknights that is not mobile but stationary. It is known for nice beaches and the Obsidian Festival, which takes place there once every summer. Sargon. Sargon is a big nation ruled by an emperor. Serving him you have a set of so-called Padishah, who can be considered his chief governors. They control a variety of Lord Amir, who rule over local territories of various sizes. On top of that, Sargon's society is divided into tribes. Some of those are completely out of the control of the Lord Amir. Some very ancient ones also just lack the means of communicating with the rest of the world. There are territories so remote in Sargon that they can't even be found on maps. Sargon is completely made up of jungles and deserts. Nomadic cities are a rather rare sight in Sargon. Because of how dangerous and hostile Sargon's environment is, infected don't get treated the way they get treated in so many other places. They just get seen as sick people. Minos. In the past, Minos was massively suffering from invasions by the neighboring Sargon. It was able to overcome those troubles thanks to a resistance movement led by the so-called 12 heroes. Minos' society seems to be dominated by the Minoan hero cult, which is located in the Hall of the 12 Heroes and led by a high priest. Minos' people are known to love competitions and events. This includes events like the Warriors Gathering and the Formula Chariot, but also the Interlocking Competition. Theaters and cinemas can be found even in smaller towns. Public baths exist there, some of them even being mixed gender baths. The three most important locations of the nation are the cities Athenius, Corinnia and Lacedaemon. There are two further nations which are nowhere to be found on this map. Let's talk about them. Durin. Durin can't be seen anywhere because it is an underground civilization. The Durin are organized in tribes which live secluded from each other. The tribes regularly have to trade with each other though. Because of that, most tribes have good relationships with one another. Large-scale bloodshed is very rare among the Durin. The landscapes of the underground are very unique. You have waterfalls, fluorescent mushrooms, stuff like that. The Durin cultivated the area by using a variety of crystals as light sources and by building massive cities. They are constantly trying to expand. Their infrastructure includes rail tracks and elevators. There also seems to be a lot of automatization, with many duties being performed by assistant devices. Aegir. Aegir is not visible because it is an underwater civilization, located more or less somewhere here. As there is no Originium in the ocean, they have no Originium and therefore no Oripathy or Catastrophes. They live in massive domes under the water, their cities illuminating the bottom of the sea. Most of the manual labor there gets done by high-tech machines. Automatic equipment can be found everywhere. Aegir citizens get assigned work that suits them the most by their government. Citizens of Aegir always do what their government says. Despite all of that, Aegir nowadays is considered to be in a state of demise, the reason for that being massive chaos and destruction which gets caused by the Seaborn, a collection of weird monsters living under the sea as well. Nice! And the quick rundown is over. As you can see, all of those places suck big time. So there's nations everywhere, lots of conflict and trouble. At least the people of Arknights only divide each other based on different ideas and politics, and not on things like, for example, race. The inhabitants of Arknights' world are divided into a large variety of races. Since I have talked about this in the past, I'm just gonna do a rather quick rundown of every race and not be as thorough in my explanations as I was with the nations. Anati, based on otters and so on, mostly found in Columbia. Anura, frog people. Arcosaurida, crocodiles from Sargon. Aslan, lion people. Caprinae, goats, rams, sheep, that stuff, a lot of them from Lytanian. Kautus, bunnies and rabbits, mostly from Rimbilitan. Ceratos, rhinoceros people. Draco, based on dragons from Western mythology from our world. Durin, dwarf people. Elafia, deer and similar animals found in many places. Felines, based on various cats, both from the wild and domesticated ones, found in a variety of places. Forte, bulls and cows. Kuranta, horses of all sorts. Kilin, based on the Kilin from Eastern mythology, found in Yen. Liberi, bird people, found in a lot of places, make up the majority of Iberia. Lung, based on dragons from Eastern mythology. Lupo, based on wolves, many from Syracusa. Manticore, based on the mythological manticore, although some would disagree. Oni, based on Oni, found in Higashi. Paros, dog people, make up the majority of Bolivar. Petram, turtles. Pythia and Phidia, both names can be found being used, they are based on snakes. Pilosa, based on sloths, found in Sargon. Reba or Reproba, both names can be found being used, based on hyenas. Sancta, based on angels, make up the majority of Laterano. Sarkas, demon people, originally found in Kasdel, but now you have a large amount of them all over the world. They are also hated everywhere. Savra, lizards and stuff. Ursus, bear people, make up a large part of Ursus. Vuiva, based on wyverns. Vulpo, fox-based people, a lot of them in Syracusa, but can be found in different places as well. Zalax, based on rodents, can be found in many places. Aegir, based on all forms of aquatic life. Originally are from the nation of Aegir, we talked about earlier, but nowadays have large diasporas in the nations of Iberia and Higashi. And all of those races refer to themselves as humanity. So if you see somebody in Arknights use this word, please don't get confused, it refers to all those people. Something we would consider normal humans does not exist in Arknights as of what we currently know. Everybody is a member of one of those races, even if the animal traits are only barely visible or not visible at all. This, and this will all live in the same city and all will consider themselves to be a part of humanity. By the way, just mentioning it because I saw some confusion around that, Oripathy has absolutely nothing to do with the animal features. Being an infected and having cat ears do have absolutely nothing to do with each other. There are other things inhabiting the world, things that cannot be considered a part of humanity. Demons, genuine eldritch beings. We know of 3 different types of demons inhabiting the world. Fire demons, who live south of Sargon in the Föhn Hotlands. Then there's the demons of the north, who constantly fight against Sami and Ursus. And then there's the Seaborn we mentioned earlier, who live at the bottom of the sea, just like the Aegir. Some consider those beings to be an even bigger threat to humanity than Oripathy or Catastrophes. So, let's summarize. The biggest difference between our world and the world of Arknights is Originium, a mineral which on one hand gets used by humanity as a very reliable power source, but on the other hand causes horrible things, like a disease known as Oripathy and natural phenomena known as Catastrophes. In order to avoid those, most of humanity has moved into so-called mobile cities. Furthermore, humanity in Arknights consists of a variety of different races who live in a variety of different nations. While humanity fights amongst each other in various different conflicts, it also gets encroached by different forms of demons from all sides. Nice. One more really big important thing, the world of Arknights is called Terra. Why didn't I give you this information right at the beginning? Because I didn't feel like it. And that's the lore of Arknights. Now, how the hell do you fit into this? Some of you might ask yourselves why I didn't mention Armia or the Doctor or Rhodes Island even once. Well, let's get into that now. I hope that you remember that one nation I told you not to forget about. Most of the history of the Sarkas and Kasdel has been lost to the ongoing conflicts over there and to the propagandistic efforts of certain scholars. What we know for sure is that it was fully destroyed 3 times so far. It managed to more or less recover every time, and the Sarkas royal court managed to reclaim it every time as well. The most recent destruction of Kasdel happened in the year 893, when a gigantic army consisting of forces from a variety of countries invaded it. At that point, Kasdel had been ruled by a king named Ferisa for a couple of centuries. She led the nation's forces against the invaders and is considered a hero by the Sarkas for her actions. Ferisa gets described to be an exceptional ruler. Her reign was marked by benevolence, and her dream to bring an escape to the meaningless conflict and sacrifice the Sarkas have always been going through. Her goal was to start a new era for the Sarkas. For that purpose, she at one point created an organization named Babel. A figure at Ferisa's side during that time was a feline named Khalcit. The two considered each other to be friends and partners. At one point, Khalcit introduced another figure to Ferisa, the so-called Doctor. Ferisa ended up having a lot of faith in that Doctor. Babel operated a large number of facilities all around Kasdel and was also conducting research in various fields. Through the efforts of Ferisa and Babel, the Sarkas slowly started to rebuild their nation. They obtained enough construction materials for several dozen mobile city plates. While that was happening, a lot of Kasdelian Sarkas back then had a very different view of how things should be. They were hoping for a return of the nation's blood-stained history, wishing to fight alongside King Ferisa against the powers who used to invade them in the past. Many of them distrusted the Doctor and Khalcit and were unhappy about how close to Ferisa they were. Those people were not the only ones standing in a very strong ideological opposition to Ferisa. There also was the Kasdel Military Council, which was being led by her own brother, General Ferisis. Ferisis and the council were very successful at stopping other nations from interfering in the recent rebuild efforts of Kasdel, and it was also him who supervised the arrival of all of the mobile city plates I mentioned earlier. Despite that success, Ferisa deems him and the council to be way too heavy-handed and direct in their approach to things. The ideological conflict between the two led to a full-blown open conflict. At one point, Ferisis just stopped listening to his sister. Following that, Ferisis one day usurped Ferisa's throne and proclaimed himself to be the regent of Kasdel. The Kasdel civil war had begun, and so had the descent of the nation into hell on Terra. Kasdel's armed forces scattered between various nobles and started to unite with civilian forces, forming various factions. The fighting of the civil war would very soon turn very brutal. Ferisa's situation in Kasdel soon started to worsen. The military council started to gain a lot of support. Many Sarkas turned their backs on Ferisa, and her information channels throughout the country started to shrink down. Talks between Babel and the military council completely broke down, and King Ferisa realized that Babel would soon come under siege. Therefore, she ordered a full-blown retreat from the nation. She said that it was just a temporary relocation just happening so that Kasdel wouldn't have too much unnecessary bloodshed. Babel abandoned a large number of its facilities and completely put its research on hold. In order to safely leave Kasdel, they chose to take a route through the mountains. While a Sarkas named Ascalon leads Babel's forces into battle against Ferisis in order to buy more time, they hire a group of mercenaries led by a Sarkas named Hödera in order to escort them. Only around 20% of the mercenaries survived that mission. Although Ferisa officially had left Kasdel, she still was supported by various ancient clans and noble families in the nation. It is said that half of the Sarkas clans supported her. Those who did used their economic powers to unify large numbers of mercenaries, effectively gathering them as warriors under her banner. The side of Regent Ferisis shortly afterwards did the same thing. The Doctor of Babel, who originally made statements in which they said that they didn't have anything to do with the conflict, ended up becoming Babel's battlefield commander. It is said that they were the one essentially running the entire war. people fighting under their side would later say that there was only victory in their eyes and that the Doctor was transformed from a scholar to a war machine. The war ended up going into a deadlock for a very long time before it suddenly shifted overnight. King Phaeresa was killed. Her death was the result of a decapitation strike by Phaeresis' forces. Shortly after, the Doctor just disappeared. We don't know what exactly happened on that day or how Phaeresa was killed. While Babel's leadership essentially ceased to exist, the majority of its core operators and the landship which it used as its mobile HQ were still there. Those Babel remnants completely left Khazad-dûm and its civil war. Together, those remnants would form a different organization, a pharmaceutical company called Rhodes Island, directly named after the landship on which it resided. It continued to follow Phaeresa's goals, but instead of bettering the lives of the Sarkas, it now aimed at bettering the lives of a different group of oppressed people, the infected. And that's where this girl becomes relevant. This is Amia, and she became the CEO of this new pharmaceutical company. Why? Good question. Rhodes Island ended up doing some really big things when it comes to the treatment of Oripathy. Its medical department, which is being led by the earlier mentioned Khalzit, has developed very effective drugs capable of suppressing Oripathy symptoms. Another big thing they developed is this piece of technology right there, an enhanced suppressor which on one hand actively suppresses crystal growth and on the other hand helps the infected with not losing control over their Originium arts. Sounds good and all, but why exactly does Rhodes Island have a private military then? Well, you see, Rhodes Island does not only provide its services in dealing with Oripathy itself, but also with the conflicts caused by Oripathy. And for that you just need some firepower. Once again though, how do you fit into this big picture? Sometime after Rhodes Island has established itself, CEO Amia made the decision to bring you back. Remember how the Doctor disappeared after Phaeresa's death? Well, they didn't really disappear, they were just hidden away somewhere. Rhodes Island sends out a rescue mission to bring you back, and the very moment at which they get to you is the moment the Arknights' main story starts, and the moment at which the anime starts. With all the info I gave you in this video, it is now time for you to jump into the story yourself. My personal suggestion to you, go and watch the anime, then start reading the main story from chapter 4 onwards, and after that jump straight into the events, you will not regret it. And with that, my dear Donnies, shout out to my channel supporters with a special thank you to Ankoku, Carousel Ava, Chris, Daniel Henriquez, Darth Eldosh, Demoboy125, Elliot Hansen, Erwin Heckler, Jimshot First, Kevinator, Longo, Neo, Cubic Sal, Vessa, Written, and the Phoenix. Thanks a lot for your support, guys, and to you, thanks for watching, and I hope that I will see you next time. Cheers!